One day, you lost 4 fingers. What would you do? Would you give up? Or would you risk everything and move to a city where nobody knows your name, just to start your life all over again? I'm Hai, and today is my first day in Hanoi. I'm here with nothing except the hope of finding a new beginning. It's 2 p.m. The sun is blazing overhead, and the heat is relentless. I'm on my way to catch a bus to Hanoi, but this isn't a bus station. It's simply a spot where a local road meets the expressway. For people around here, though, this is the place where every journey begins. Anyone heading to the city waits here for a passing bus, and when people return home after days or even months away, this is where they get off before making the final trip back to their families. There's no ticket counter, no waiting room, not even a shelter from the sun. Just a few people standing quietly by the roadside, watching the highway and hoping their bus will stop.
Lơ được khách và kiếm được tiền rồi.
Every day, this ordinary roadside corner witnesses countless goodbyes and joyful reunions. For many people, it's more than just a pickup point. It's where dreams begin and where the journey home finally ends.
Đi xe máy luôn hả anh? Xe máy à? Không, có xe chưa, tôi gọi xe cho. À, mình có xe chưa? Em đi về Hà Nội cơ. Hà Nội á? Anh về đâu anh?
Many visitors might be surprised to see a group of middle-aged men with suntanned skin, dressed in simple clothes covered with a little road dust, waiting here every day. In Vietnam, we call them She drivers. A She is a motorcycle taxi. Their main job is to take passengers to places that buses can't reach. They also deliver packages, transport goods, and help travelers who haven't been able to find a ride after getting off the bus. For many people, returning home after a long journey, these drivers are often the first familiar faces they see. Some of them have been doing this job for decades. They're more than just motorcycle taxi drivers. They've become a small but meaningful part of everyday life in the countryside. While waiting for my bus, I heard an interesting story from the motorcycle taxi drivers. There are only a handful of them working in this area. What surprised me most was that they never compete or fight over passengers. Instead, they follow a simple rule that everyone has respected for years. Passengers are picked up in turn. Whoever's turn it is gets the next customer. Only after that driver has left with the passenger does the next person move up in line. There's no supervisor watching over them, no written contract, just mutual trust and respect. Everyone follows the same rule to make sure the work is shared fairly. I was genuinely impressed. Even though they're older men doing an ordinary job, they treat each other with honesty and respect, proving that fairness doesn't always need rules on paper. It can simply come from people's character. What impressed me most wasn't just the way these drivers work, it was the way they treat one another. Most of them were complete strangers when they first met. They didn't grow up together, and they weren't lifelong friends. But after spending their days here, they've built a bond that feels like family. Whenever someone needs a hand, the others are quick to help. Whether it's giving directions to a traveler carrying heavy luggage or simply checking in on one another, kindness comes Naturally, no one keeps score. No one expects anything in return. To me, this reflects something deeply rooted in Vietnamese culture. We value kindness, unity, and helping one another through life's challenges. These aren't just words, they're values that have been passed down through generations and can still be found in the simplest moments of everyday life. I've been waiting here for more than 2 hours. The bus I'm supposed to catch still hasn't arrived. Everyone who was waiting with me has already boarded their buses and left. Now I'm the only one standing by the roadside. To be honest, I'm starting to feel a little worried. Maybe I'm waiting in the wrong place, or maybe the bus isn't coming today. Standing here at the afternoon heat, all I can do is keep looking down the highway, hoping the next bus will finally be mine. At last, the bus to Hanoi finally arrived. Every worry that had built up during those long hours of waiting suddenly faded away. From that moment, I knew my life was about to take a completely new direction. This was my very first time traveling on a Vietnamese sleeper bus. In the past, I had only taken regular buses with standard seats, so everything about this experience felt completely new to me. As soon as you board, the staff gives each passenger a small plastic bag to store their shoes or sandals before climbing onto the sleeping berth. It's a simple rule, but it helps keep the inside of the bus clean and comfortable for everyone. Each berth comes with its own blanket and pillow. The space isn't large, but it's more than enough to relax and get some rest, especially on a long journey. What surprised me the most, though, was the price. For just about $4 I was able to travel nearly 100 kilometers on a clean and comfortable sleeper bus, complete with a bed, a blanket, and a pillow. In my opinion, it's one of the most affordable and convenient ways to travel around Vietnam. For the price, the experience exceeded all of my expectations. Many people will probably be wondering, what happened to my hand? The truth is, just about a year ago, I was a healthy young man like anyone else. At the time, I was working in a woodworking factory. Then, in a single moment of distraction, my hand was pulled into one of the machines. The impact crushed the bones in 4 of my fingers beyond repair. My family rushed me to the hospital hoping the surgeons could save them, but despite everyone's efforts, it wasn't possible. The doctors had to amputate all 4 fingers to save the rest of my hand and arm. Even now, thinking back to that moment still brings a heavy feeling to my chest. It's a memory I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. That accident changed everything. Simple everyday tasks suddenly became difficult and many opportunities disappeared because I was no longer able to do the work I once could. But I've learned one important thing. As long as I can keep moving forward, there's still hope to build a new life. The expressway was finally coming to an end. As the bus entered Hanoi, the scenery outside began to change. Traffic became heavier, with a constant stream of cars and motorbikes filling the roads, a clear sign that we were getting closer to the city center. Up ahead was Thang Long Bridge, one of Hanoi's most iconic bridges. For decades, it has served as a major gateway, connecting Vietnam's northwestern region with the capital.
Vì tiền công nữa.
Tao vẫn có khẩu tiền công này.
Dạ.
Mày biết thì mẹ cho tiền 100.000 thì mẹ 80 tạo kéo thật rồi. Cả bất kể cái gì.
Chú không chuyển khẩu đi sang bên này à?
Không, là cứ để khẩu đấy cơ. Rồi đi vẽ vào như là người ta kể cả nếu giả sử mất thẻ căn cước người ta báo luôn là ở đâu chả được. Ở đâu nó chả làm thẻ căn cước đúng không?
Đúng rồi. Đâu rồi?
Còn đổ về đóng góp thôn thì ta cũng chẳng lấy vào thôn cái gì, của ta cũng chẳng người ta về làm cái gì phải đóng góp.
As the bus crossed the bridge, the city's skyline slowly came into view. It was the first time I'd ever seen Hanoi standing so close before my eyes. At that moment, my heart was filled with mixed emotions. I was excited to finally arrive in the city I had only imagined. But at the same time, I couldn't hide my anxiety. I had no idea what kind of life was waiting for me on the other side of that bridge.
Lấy limousine mà làm tăng bo. Quyết đi nữa với nhanh.
As the skyscraper slowly came into view, I felt an invisible weight settle on my shoulders. It was the first time I'd ever seen a city this big. Everything felt larger, busier, and faster than anything I had known before. Surrounded by such a massive city, I suddenly felt very small. After losing 4 fingers in the accident, I was no longer the same worker I used to be. So instead of feeling excited, I found myself feeling even more anxious. Could someone like me really find a job and build a new life in a city like this? That question stayed in my mind as the bus rolled closer to the heart of Hanoi. The journey was slowly coming to an end. The bus began making more frequent stops as passengers got off one by one. Each person stepped off with a different destination and a different story. Some had come to Hanoi to explore the city. Some were returning after visiting their hometown. Others were simply on their way to another day of work. Everyone carried their own thoughts and emotions, but there was one thing they all seemed to have in common. Almost everyone was in a hurry. I realized that this was the rhythm of life in a big city. No one seemed to stand still for very long, because somewhere ahead, something was already waiting for them.
Tao nói nhá, mày cứ nói trước rồi mày biết, mày cứ lò dò mà tiến lùi sẽ ôm cho mày lấy chân. Thịt mẹ mày 30 triệu, 50 triệu cho mày lát chân luôn. Đấy, chưa? Đấy, đây xuống không? Xe nó vào, mày tha cho người ta đây, để cho người ta lên. Xong rồi mời.
My final destination was Mai Dinh bus station. It is one of the largest and busiest bus terminals in northern Vietnam. Every day, hundreds of buses arrive here from provinces all across the country, bringing thousands of passengers, each with a different destination and a different story. Some are returning after spending years away from home. Some, like me, are setting foot in Hanoi for the very first time. Others stop here only briefly before boarding another bus to continue their journey somewhere else.
Về đâu anh trai?
Standing in the middle of the crowd, I finally realized just how vast Hanoi really is. Everyone seemed to be moving in a hurry. The sounds of buses, station announcements, and people calling out to one another never seemed to stop. Everything kept moving non-stop, as if the city never slept. After standing there for a while, I realized that this bus station was like a small reflection of society itself. People from every walk of life pass through this place every single day. Some were neatly dressed, pulling clean suitcases behind them. Others carried nothing more than an old backpack or a few heavy bags over their shoulders. I noticed people sitting on the sidewalk, quickly eating a boxed meal or a piece of bread before continuing their journey. Some were busy calling family members to pick them up. Others sat quietly by themselves, waiting for the next bus. Even inside the station, the waiting areas looked very different. Some were clean, modern, and comfortable. Others were much simpler, with only a few plastic chairs where tired travelers rested after long hours on the road. In this one place, I could see people from so many different backgrounds crossing paths. Although everyone had a different job, a different life, and a different destination, for a brief moment they all shared the same space, either beginning a new journey or bringing one to an end. And today, I was just one of them. Carrying nothing more than a small backpack, I stepped off the bus filled with uncertainty, but also with the hope that Hanoi might give me a chance to start my life over. After leaving the bus station, I headed toward the main entrance. Now it was time to start looking for a job. Before coming to Hanoi, many people had told me the same thing. If you don't know where to start, just go to my Den bus station. Talk to the motorbike taxi drivers, they seem to know everything. They meet hundreds of newcomers arriving in Hanoi every day. Many of them know which neighborhoods are hiring, what kinds of jobs are available, and they're often willing to point people in the right direction. So I decided to give it a try. I hoped that a simple conversation with one of the motorbike taxi drivers might lead me to my very first opportunity to build a new life in Hanoi.
Gọi đi làm gì, gọi làm gì đi làm gì, cho anh em đi làm này hả?
Anh có biết chỗ nào giới thiệu việc làm không?
Đọc ơi, đọc bác ơi. Có Zalo này, đây có Zalo gì? Có gọi mẹ. Gọi Zalo ấy, bảo ra đây cái này. Mình nhớ cái yêu đi rồi, nó bảo quay này bao tiền nhỉ?
I explained that about a year ago, I had been in a workplace accident and lost 4 fingers on one hand. Since then, finding a suitable job had become much more difficult. All I wanted was a job that I could still do with the hand I have today, so I asked if they could help me, if they knew of anyone hiring or any work that might suit my condition. They listened carefully. No one looked at me with pity or turned me away. Instead, they asked a few questions about what I was still able to do and started thinking about where they could send me. At that moment, I felt a little more hopeful in a city where I didn't know anyone. The kindness of complete strangers gave me the courage to believe that maybe this new beginning was possible.
Lúc nào qua được hả chú hay như nào ạ? Là đi làm ngay hay là như nào hả chú? Nhưng mà cháu có cháu có một cái là cháu hơi khiếm khuyết tí là cháu cụt mất mình ngón tay. Vâng, thế thì cháu mới bảo là xem có cái việc nào phù hợp thì cháu mới làm được.
Được gọi cho nó xem. Đúng rồi, câu bồ lúc sau nó được.
Cháu cũng vừa mới xuống đây thì cũng chưa biết đâu ở đâu ấy.
Nó đón được ở đấy thì ra đấy được.
Vâng. Thế để cháu bảo cho anh chở vào.
Yeah.
Maybe luck had finally found me. After hearing my story, the motorbike taxi driver started making a few phone calls on my behalf. Not long afterwards, someone agreed to meet with me to discuss a possible job opportunity. It wasn't a job offer. It was simply a chance to meet and see whether I might be a good fit. But at that moment, even being given an opportunity to sit down and talk meant everything to me. One of the drivers smiled and said, "Hop on, I'll take you there." As I sat on the back of his motorbike, I felt both nervous and hopeful. I had no idea what would happen at the meeting.
Bảo là đi trải nghiệm mà. Không cần lấy lương được mà, chỉ cho cần đi làm thôi mà.
Ông cứ đang ở nhà nhưng có số.
Ông bảo là cứ ấy đi mà. Nó khó quá thôi anh ạ. Kiểu tối nay hôm nay kiểu muộn ấy. Thì để sáng mai em qua.
The motorbike taxi driver took me to the meeting point. We waited there for quite a while. Time kept passing, but the person I was supposed to meet never showed up. A bad feeling slowly started to grow inside me. Maybe they had changed their mind, or perhaps, after hearing about my situation, they no longer wanted to meet me. All kinds of thoughts began running through my head. But the driver never gave up. He kept making phone calls. When no one answered, he sent a message. Then he tried calling another number he had. After each unsuccessful call, he simply turned to me and said, "Let me try one more time." I was deeply touched. He was a complete stranger, yet he was doing everything he could to help me. Unfortunately, none of his efforts seemed to be working. The person on the other end still wasn't answering, so all we could do was keep waiting, while my hope slowly began to fade.
Thôi em ạ, ông không nhận.
Dạ. Thế bao tiền em gửi?
Đưa anh bao nhiêu thì đưa.
Đây, em gửi anh 10.000 uống nước nhá. Cảm ơn nhá.
01.
01 à? Phang chứ?
Hả?
Phang chứ?
Vàng kéo. Đô đè là chết.
My feeling had been right. The person had changed their mind. The meeting was no longer happening. The moment I heard those words, I fell silent. The little hope I had just begun to feel disappeared once again. The motorbike taxi driver looked at me with sympathy. I think he was disappointed too, because he had genuinely tried his best to help me. In the end, we had to say goodbye. Before leaving, I offered to pay him for all the time and effort he had spent helping me. He simply smiled and said, "Just give me enough for a bottle of water, about 40 cents. He refused to accept anything more. I was deeply grateful. Even though things hadn't worked out, he had done everything he could for someone he had only just met. I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. And then I continued walking, alone. This time, I had no idea where I was going. I just kept moving forward, no map, no plan. I didn't even know where my next stop would be. In a city as enormous as Hanoi, I could only hope there was a place somewhere that belonged to me. A little farther down the road, I stopped at a busy intersection. I wasn't tired. I simply didn't know which way to go. Around me, crowds of people hurried past in every direction. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Everyone had somewhere to be, except me. I stood there surrounded by thousands of strangers, feeling an emptiness I had never experienced before. Before leaving my hometown, I had filled my mind with hope. We believed that if I worked hard enough, everything would eventually fall into place. But standing there in the middle of this unfamiliar city, I realized that starting over was going to be much harder than I had ever imagined. Ahead of me, I noticed a small open area on slightly higher ground. At least I could sit there for a while, rest, and think about what to do next. Nothing today had gone the way I had imagined. When I first arrived in Hanoi, I believed that if I kept trying, an opportunity would eventually come. But reality was much harder than I expected. I slowly walked up to the open space. I placed my backpack beside me and quietly watched the endless stream of traffic below. The city carried on as if it were just another ordinary day. No one knew that someone sitting there had just lost his very first chance. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about giving up. I simply didn't know where to begin again. My mind was filled with questions. Where would I sleep tonight? How would I continue looking for work tomorrow? What if every opportunity ended the same way? For the first time since arriving in Hanoi, I truly understood what it meant to feel alone in a city of millions. After sitting there for a while, I noticed the sky beginning to grow dark. Back home, my mother was probably worrying about me. Before I left, she reminded me again and again, call me as soon as you arrive. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to stop worrying. I took out my phone. I took a deep breath and dialed home. Strangely, as I listened to the ring and tone, I realized I didn't know what to say. I didn't want my mother to know that nothing had gone as planned. I didn't want her lying awake all night worrying about me. So I decided to tell her only the things that would put her mind at ease. That I had arrived safely in Hanoi. That everything was fine. As for everything that had happened today, I would carry it by myself, because sometimes the people we love are the very ones we try hardest to protect from our own worries.
Rồi thế nha.
After calling my mother, I picked up my phone again. At that moment, I had only one thought. Maybe there was still someone who could help me. I scrolled them through my contacts, calling and messaging every friend I could think of, but things didn't go the way I had hoped. Some of them had already left Hanoi, some had changed their phone numbers, others simply didn't answer. With every unanswered call, a little more of my hope disappeared. I stared at my phone, wondering who else I could possibly call. The sky slowly grew darker, street lights began to turn on one by one, people hurried home after a long day at work, and there I was, sitting beside my backpack, without a job, without knowing where I would spend the night or where I would begin again tomorrow. I thought, maybe this was how the day would end. But just as I was about to lose hope, something completely unexpected happened. And that single moment changed the course of my journey in Hanoi. What would you do if one day you lost 4 fingers? My name is Hai. I'm 28 years old. A workplace accident took 4 fingers from my right hand. Instead of staying in my hometown, I chose to leave everything behind and move to Hanoi. Alone. No family. No friends. Previously, I arrived in Hanoi with one simple hope: to find a job, to have one chance to start my life over after losing 4 fingers in a workplace accident. I truly believed if I worked harder than everyone else, someone would be willing to give me a chance. But things didn't go the way I had imagined. The moment they learned about my hand, they refused to meet me. In that instant, almost all the hope I had carried with me from my hometown to Hanoi disappeared. For the first time in my life, I realized that a city of more than 8 million people could make one person feel so completely alone. With nothing but a backpack on my shoulders, I wandered from one street to another. I had nowhere to go. I didn't know where I would sleep that night, and I had no idea how I was going to survive the next day. Eventually, I sat down on a quiet street corner. The traffic kept moving, people hurried past, but I just sat there looking down at the hand that had lost 4 fingers. Only one question kept running through my mind: should I just go home? But if I went back, I knew I would spend the rest of my life wondering, what if I had stayed? So I took out my phone, opened my contacts, scrolled through every name. I called one friend after another. Some never answered. Some had already left Hanoi. Others could only offer words of encouragement, but they couldn't really help. I was almost out of hope. Then one call finally connected. The voice on the other end said just one sentence: "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you." At that moment, for the first time that day, I felt a little hope return. Maybe, just maybe, my journey in Hanoi wasn't over yet. I sat there and waited. Part of me still had hope, but another part was afraid. It had been more than 10 years since we'd last spoken. I wasn't even sure if he was really gonna come. After a while, a motorbike pulled up in front of me. He got off, looked at me, and froze for a few seconds. I don't think he ever imagined that after all these years, this would be how we'd meet again. We were classmates back in middle school. Back then, we were just carefree kids. More than 10 years passed. Life took each of us down a different path. The only thing I remembered was that he was working in Hanoi. When I had nowhere else to turn, I decided to call him. I never expected that the one person willing to come and help me would be a friend I hadn't seen in over a decade. At that moment, I realized something. Some friendships don't need constant contact. Even after years of silence, when you truly need them, they're still there. As we rode through the streets of Hanoi, we caught up on everything. He asked how I'd been, how my family was doing, and for the first time, I told someone the whole story. I told him about the accident, about losing 4 fingers, about the months I spent without a job, about why I left my hometown and came all the way to Hanoi, hoping for a fresh start. Then I told him that on my very first day here, I was turned away simply because of my hand. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge me, he didn't pity me, he just listened. Maybe sometimes what we need most isn't advice, it's simply someone who's willing to sit beside us and listen to our story. On the way to his place, I kept thinking, after spending so many years working in Hanoi, he was probably living in one of those tall apartment buildings. But I was wrong. Instead, he took me to its low-income housing neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The farther we rode, the narrower the roads became. Wide streets slowly turned into tiny alleyways. Some of them were only wide enough for a single motorbike. The alleys twisted and turned like a maze. If I had tried to find this place on my own, I probably never would have made it when we finally arrived. I realized he wasn't living alone. He shared the house with his older brother and sister-in-law. The house wasn't big. There was nothing luxurious about it. Everything was simple. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about what they didn't have. I was thinking about the warmth they had. After spending the whole day wandering through Hanoi with nowhere to go, I finally had a place where I could stop and rest. His home was only about 8 square meters, yet somehow it was enough space for 3 people to live in. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed how compact everything was. Clothes, cooking utensils, everyday essentials. Every corner of the room was carefully used. At first, I was surprised, but it didn't take long for me to understand. For workers like him, home isn't a place for luxury. It's simply a place to come back to. During the day, everyone is out working from morning until night. The room stays empty for most of the day. It's only in the evening that they return to rest and recharge for another day's work. That's why Having a large house isn't the priority. All they really need is a place that's safe, clean, and comfortable enough to get a good night's sleep. For many working-class people in Hanoi, living this way is a choice. They give up a little comfort to save as much money as they can, because sometimes that's the only way to build a future in a big city. When they learned about what I was going through, everyone was incredibly kind. No one asked what I had brought. No one made me feel like a burden. Instead, they treated me like part of the family. My friend's older brother and sister-in-law were genuinely kind people, as knowing that I had just arrived from my hometown. They even went out to buy extra food for dinner. It was such a thoughtful gesture, and honestly, it made me feel both grateful and a little embarrassed.
Nước ở máy này đâu? Để ba lô ở đây à? Để nhá.
Later, my friend took me to a small street food stall nearby. They were selling roasted duck and grilled pork intestines. Street food like this is everywhere in Vietnam, especially in neighborhoods where working-class families live. Most people work from early morning until late in the evening. By the time they get home, they're often too tired to cook. So buying freshly prepared food from local street vendors is part of everyday life. It's quick, affordable, and surprisingly delicious. A whole roasted duck costs less than $10, enough for an entire family to share. But what impressed me the most wasn't just the food, it was the people. The vendors greeted every customer with a smile. They were warm, friendly, and welcoming. Moments like these reminded me that even in a city full of strangers, kindness can still make you feel at home. My friend said he wanted to introduce me to his older brother. He smiled and said, "Come on, I'll take you to where my brother's working." We rode for another few minutes. From a distance, I could already see him. He was busy building something. His clothes were covered in sawdust, sweat soaked through his shirt. He looked like someone who had been working since early morning, but the moment he saw me, he put down his tools, walked over with a warm smile, and shook my hand. The first thing he asked wasn't what I did for a living. He didn't ask why I'd come to Hanoi. He didn't ask how much money I had left. Instead, he looked at my injured hand and quietly asked, "How's your hand now? Does it still hurt?" It was such a simple question, yet somehow it hit me harder than anything I'd heard all day. Since arriving in Hanoi, I'd met so many people. Some turned me away, some only looked at my hand, then shook their heads. But he was the first person who asked if I was okay. In that moment, I no longer felt like a stranger. I felt like a younger brother, being welcomed into someone else's family. After talking for a while, he showed me what he'd been working on. It was a small building that would soon become the office of a truck taxi company. Standing outside, you would never guess that almost every part of it had been built by his own hands, the frame, the walls, the roof, even many of the details inside. He had done almost everything himself. Then he invited me inside. The room was only about 10 square meters, small, but incredibly well designed. There was a work desk, a computer, storage shelves, lights, tools. Everything had its place. Nothing felt wasted. Every inch of the room had a purpose. Looking around, it didn't feel cramped. It felt efficient. He smiled and said something I'll probably never forget. You don't need a big house. You just need enough space to work and enough space to rest. At first, it sounded like a simple sentence, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it described the lives of countless workers across Vietnam. They aren't chasing luxury, they're chasing stability, saving every dollar they can, and so tomorrow will be a little easier than today. Then he told me something that surprised me even more. The entire building had cost him only about $1,000 US. I could hardly believe it, because from the outside, it looked far more expensive. He laughed and explained why. Most of the materials weren't new at all. The timber, the steel, the doors, the shelves. Many of them had come from old construction sites, things other people no longer wanted. He collected them, fixed them, cut them, and gave them a second life. Standing in that little room, as I realized, some people don't build their future with money. They build it with patience, with hard work, and with whatever they have in their hands. As I watched him, I couldn't help seeing a part of myself. Another young man who had left his hometown to chase a better future in Hanoi. We both came to the city carrying hope. The only difference was that I had arrived with 4 fingers missing and no idea what tomorrow would look like. We finally called it a day, packed up our tools, and headed back home together. The moment we walked through the door, the smell of freshly cooked rice filled the tiny room. My friend's sister-in-law had already prepared dinner. She had been waiting for everyone to get home, so the family could eat together. The house was incredibly small, with only 1 bathroom. Everyone took turns showering. No one rushed, no one complained. It was simply part of everyday life.
Một vòng trái đất, anh ngồi đây, anh chờ em. Đấy là còn được ở nhà rồi đấy, mới có 30 tháng thôi.
By now, they were all used to it since I was their guest that evening. They had prepared much more food than usual. There was roasted duck, fresh vegetables, several homemade dishes, far more than what they normally ate. Seeing the table, I felt grateful. But I also felt a little guilty, and because I knew they had gone out of their way for me. My friend's older brother smiled and said, "We don't usually eat like this. Most days you're 1 vegetable dish and 1 meat dish. That's enough." For working families like theirs, meals aren't about luxury. They're simply about filling an empty stomach before another long day of work. One small detail caught my attention. There weren't enough serving bowls for every dish, so some of the food was served directly in cooking pots. No one seemed bothered by it. If something would still be used, there was no reason to replace it. Saving money, often starts with little things like that. Dinner was simple. There was no elegant dining room, no expensive food, just a family gathered around a small table. Sharing stories between bites, they talked about work, asked each other how the day had gone, laughed about little things that had happened. Then the conversation slowly turned toward the future. Everyone had their own dream. One hoped to save enough money to build a house someday. Another wanted to start a family. Someone else simply wished for a stable job so rent wouldn't feel so stressful every month. As I listened, I realized that life in Hanoi wasn't easy for any of them. Each person had left their hometown behind. Each of them was working long hours, doing whatever they could to make a living. They traded comfort, time, and sometimes even their health for the chance to earn an honest income. No one claimed life was easy, but at least they had work, they had a reason to wake up every morning, and they still believed that tomorrow could be a little better than today. Sitting at that small dinner table, surrounded by people I had only met a few hours earlier, I felt something I hadn't felt since arriving in Hanoi. For the first time, I didn't feel alone anymore. After dinner, everyone naturally started cleaning up. The two women cleared the table, washed the dishes, and packed the leftover food into the refrigerator, saving it for the next meal. Nothing went to waste. For working families like theirs, every meal is earned through a long day of hard work, so every bit of food is appreciated. Watching them reminded me of my own family back home. My mother always saved the leftovers too, to warm up the next day. Maybe that's something ordinary families share. Life may not be luxurious, but they always know how to value what they have. Once everyone had finished cleaning up, the little house slowly became quiet. The long day was finally coming to an end. It was my turn to take a shower. I bent down and opened the backpack that had been with me ever since I left my hometown. That backpack had traveled with me on the overnight bus. It had followed me through the streets of Hanoi. It had been with me while I searched for work, and it had stayed on my shoulders through every disappointment of my first day. You might be wondering, what was inside? Honestly, almost nothing. Just 2 sets of clothes, one that I was wearing and one clean set to change into, along with a toothbrush, toothpaste, a towel, and a few basic toiletries. That was everything I owned as I began a completely new life. No laptop, no expensive camera, no valuable belongings, just a small backpack carrying everything I had left. When I packed it back home, I imagined I would only need these things for a few days. I thought I'd quickly find a job, earn my first paycheck, then slowly buy whatever I needed. But after my very first day in Hanoi, I realized life wasn't gonna be that simple. Holding my clean clothes in my hands, I quietly walked into the bathroom. It was tiny, barely enough room for one person to stand. The walls were old, the space was cramped, but it had everything that mattered. Running water, a mirror, a hook for my clothes. Nothing more, nothing less. To most people, it would seem like an ordinary bathroom, but to me, after spending an entire day walking under the sun, being rejected again and again, and carrying the weight of so many emotions, having a clean place to wash away the sweat and dust felt like an incredible blessing. As the water ran over my shoulders, it washed away the dirt, but it couldn't wash away the thoughts in my mind. I kept asking myself, what would tomorrow look like, or would anyone give me a chance? Was there really a place in this city for someone missing 4 fingers? Then I stopped thinking for a moment because I realized something, at least tonight. Yeah, I wasn't wandering the streets anymore. I had a roof over my head, like a safe place to sleep, and people who had welcomed me like family. Sometimes, when life reaches its hardest moments, happiness isn't about having more. It's simply about having a place to take a shower, a clean set of clothes to wear, and the comfort of knowing you'll have somewhere to sleep when the day is over. After my shower, everyone began getting ready for bed. Seeing me unsure of what to do, they took out a mosquito net and helped me set up a place to sleep. The room was less than 10 square meters. 4 people shared the same small space, yet everything was neatly arranged. Each person still had a little corner of their own, not much, but enough to rest after a long day. While we were getting the bed ready, they kept asking me, "Do you think you'll be able to sleep on your first night away from home?" And then they smiled and reassured me that don't worry too much. You'll find a job eventually. The most important thing is to take care of yourself. You've still got a long road ahead. They're simple words, but after spending the entire day facing rejection, those words meant more than they probably realized. I had no family in Hanoi, no job, no certainty about tomorrow. Yet on my very first day, I had met people who welcomed me into their home, shared their dinner, gave me a place to sleep, and treated me with genuine kindness. That night, lying beneath the mosquito net in that tiny room, listening to the gentle hum of the fan and the voices slowly fading into silence, I realized something. Maybe the greatest thing that happened on my first day in Hanoi wasn't finding work, it was finding good people, because sometimes knowing that someone believes you'll be okay is enough to give you the strength to face another tomorrow. One by one, everyone fell asleep. The room grew quiet. All I could hear was the steady hum of the fan and the distant sound of traffic outside the narrow alley. But I was still awake. My eyes remained wide open, staring into the darkness. I turned to my left, then to my right, again and again. No matter how hard I tried, sleep never came. The more I closed my eyes, the louder my thoughts became. What would happen tomorrow? Would anyone be willing to hire me? Or would I be rejected all over again because of my hand? If I couldn't find work, how long would the little money I had last? Should I go back home or stay here without knowing what was waiting for me? For the first time in my life, the future felt completely uncertain. Before coming to Hanoi, I believed that hard work was enough. I believed that if I kept trying, that someone would eventually give me a chance. But after just one day, that belief had already begun to fade. I wasn't afraid of hard labor. I wasn't afraid of long hours. I wasn't afraid of suffering. The thing I feared most was never being given the chance to begin. I slowly raised my left hand and then went and looked at the empty space where 4 fingers used to be. The accident had happened long ago. The wounds on my skin had healed, but some wounds never healed the same way. Every time I looked at my hand, I was reminded of the day my life changed forever. Sometimes I wondered, if that accident had never happened, would my life be different today? But no matter how many times I asked that question, the past would never change. The only thing I could do was keep moving forward, even if every step felt uncertain, even if I was afraid, even if I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. That first night in Hanoi, I barely slept at all. Not because the bed was unfamiliar, Not because the room was too small, but because one question kept echoing in my mind. What will tomorrow bring? And where is my life going from here? If you only saw these scenes, you'd probably think I was working at a construction site, but actually, today I'm just tagging along to learn. It's my first time experiencing a job I never imagined I'd do. A job that's becoming more and more common in Hanoi. It's called cargo taxi. Unlike a regular taxi that carries passengers, these trucks transport almost anything people need to move, from tables, chairs, refrigerators, and washing machines to equipment weighing hundreds of kilograms, like the giant concrete breaker you're looking at right now. Today, I'll be following my friend to see what a typical day in this job is really like.
Buộc đi. Đây là đầu trên. Mệt quá. Hơi bụi là sau lau ngay đi nhá. Chặt hết người rồi. Anh em chưa kịp dọn đấy. Cái bộ này chưa kịp dọn đấy. Anh đến đeo vào cái không luôn rồi.
Ở đây nửa ngày bụi ngay rồi. Không cần. Thôi khách mua về khách vệ sinh được. Về mua về chưa diễn xong chưa lắp.
This morning, I woke up in my friend's small room. It is also where I spent my first night after arriving in Hanoi. I barely slept last night. Not because the room was uncomfortable, but because my mind was full of questions. I came to Hanoi hoping to find a new opportunity, but at this point, I still had no idea what kind of job I was going to do. The only thing I knew was this. If I stayed where I was and did nothing, nothing in my life would change. Scenes of brushing teeth, washing up, folding the blanket, and getting dressed. After getting ready, I was about to head out. My friend looked at me and asked, "Friend, so, got any plans today?" Me, not really. I honestly don't even know where to start. He smiled and said, "If you don't have anything going on, come work with me for the day. You won't get rich, but at least you'll make a little money." To be honest, I didn't think twice. At that moment, just having something to do already felt like a chance, so I said yes right away. It was also my first time riding in a cargo taxi. At first, I thought this job was basically just helping people move houses, but the more I learned about it, the more I realized it's much more than that. Every day, customers call with completely different requests. Some need to move a wardrobe, some just have a few bags or boxes, others need to transport heavy industrial machinery. As long as it fits on the truck, the driver finds a way to get it where it needs to go. Some jobs take less than an hour, others mean driving hundreds of kilometers. No 2 days are ever the same. You never know what you'll be transporting next. Maybe that's what makes this job so interesting. And honestly, I couldn't wait to find out what our first delivery of the day would be. The truck finally hits the road. This was my first time spending a day with a truck taxi driver. To be honest, before today, I only knew about regular taxis that carry people. I had no idea there was another kind of taxi in Vietnam, one that carries cargo instead. If someone needs to move something that's too big for a motorbike but doesn't want to rent a full-size truck, they simply call a truck taxi. The driver comes to pick up the item and delivers it wherever the customer needs. It sounds like a simple job, but after only a few minutes in the truck, I could already tell there was much more to it. I turned to my friend and asked, "So, how long have you been doing this?" He smiled. "Almost 7 years. Every day is different. Different customers, different jobs, different stories." I asked another question. "Do you get orders every day?" He shook his head. "Not always. Some days the phone never stops ringing. Other days, you can wait for hours without a single call. Your income depends entirely on your customers." While we were talking, I looked out the window. Hanoi was fully awake now. Motorbikes filled every street. Everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere, and me, I still had no idea where life would take me next. Maybe following my friend today would help me discover a new opportunity. Just then, his phone rang. A new job had come in. He glanced at the screen and smiled. "We've got our first customer." I asked, "So, what are we transporting today?" He laughed. "You'll see when we get there." The rest of the drive flew by as he shared stories from years on the job. Some days, he only delivered a small electric fan. Other days, he helped families move their entire home. And sometimes, customers asked him to transport things he never imagined anyone would need moved. That's what makes this job so interesting. You never know what the next phone call will bring. Every trip is a completely different adventure. As about 20 minutes later, we pulled into a yard full of heavy construction equipment. The moment I stepped out of the truck, one enormous piece of steel immediately caught my attention. I turned to my friend. "Is that our delivery?" He smiled and nodded. "Yep, our first job of the day." That's when I realized our first shipment wasn't furniture, it wasn't household appliances, it was a massive hydraulic breaker attachment for an excavator. Just looking at it made me wonder one thing. How on earth were we going to get something that heavy onto the truck? This was my first time visiting a place like this. Everywhere I looked, there were giant construction machines, excavators, rollers, huge steel components I couldn't even name. The atmosphere felt completely different from anywhere I'd been before. Then I saw it, a gigantic hydraulic breaker sitting in the middle of the yard. That was our first delivery of the day. Even standing several meters away, I could tell just how massive it was. It was almost as tall as I was. Its steel body was covered with scratches from years of hard work on construction sites. I turned to my friend. "How heavy is this thing?" He answered casually, "A little over 1 ton." I couldn't help but laugh. For a moment I had actually imagined we would lift it ourselves. Now I realized that wasn't even remotely possible. To load something this heavy, they needed a crane. Each chain was carefully secured before anyone gave the signal to lift. Everyone stayed focused. One small mistake could become a serious accident. I stood back and watched quietly. It was my first time seeing machinery this heavy being loaded onto a truck. As the crane operator slowly pulled the cable, the giant breaker lifted off the ground. For a few moments, more than a ton of solid steel was hanging in the air. It was both incredible and a little intimidating. The workers kept signaling each other, carefully guiding the load into position. Even a few centimeters off could damage the truck or put someone at risk. Fortunately, everything went exactly as planned. A few minutes later, the breaker was resting securely on the truck bed. My friend immediately grabbed heavy chains to secure it. He looked at me and said, "If you don't tie it down properly, one hard break could turn it into a disaster." That sentence really stayed with me. Until that moment, I thought transporting cargo was simply about loading it onto a truck and driving away, but there was so much more behind the job: experience, responsibility, and a constant focus on safety. After checking the chains one last time, our first delivery was finally ready to go. I climbed back into the truck. My friend started the engine. Slowly, we left the equipment yard behind. The construction site was still nearly 30 kilometers away, and as we pulled back onto the road, I couldn't help but wonder what other experience this unusual job would bring before the day was over. With the cargo finally secured, we were back on the road. Right behind us sat more than a ton of solid steel. Even though everything was tied down tightly, my friend drove with incredible care. He looked over and said, "The heavier the load, the slower you drive. That one hard brake or a fast turn can be dangerous." That's when I noticed something. He never accelerated aggressively. He slowed down long before every intersection. Every turn was smooth and controlled. After years on the job, safety had clearly become second nature. While traffic was still moving, I asked him, "What made you stay in this job for so many years?" He smiled. Every job has its hard days, but this one lets me see places most people never do. One customer lives in a luxury villa. The next one works on a construction site. Sometimes I even have to squeeze this truck into tiny alleys. No 2 days are ever the same. I nodded. He was right. I'd only been with him for a few hours and I'd already seen a completely different side of the city. If I hadn't joined him today, I probably never would have known this job even existed. While we waited for the light to change, I asked another question. Do you ever get difficult customers? He laughed, of course. Some people ask you to wait for an hour after you arrive. Others say the item is small, but when you get there, it weighs over a ton. And sometimes they change the delivery address halfway through the trip. He shrugged, but that's part of working in customer service. Listening to his stories made me realize something. Driving the truck is only one part of the job. You also need patience, good communication, quick thinking, and the ability to stay calm when plans suddenly change. Those aren't things you learn from a book, they're lessons earned through years of experience. As we drove farther, the scenery slowly changed. The tall buildings disappeared behind us. Construction yards began to replace them, dump trucks, excavators, concrete mixers. It was obvious we were getting close. In the distance, I could already see the tall cranes rising above the construction site. The sound of heavy machinery grew louder with every minute. My friend smiled and said, "Get ready, we're almost there." I took a deep breath. Our first delivery of the day was about to be completed, but somehow it felt like my journey in Hanoi was only just beginning. After nearly an hour on the road, we finally arrived. The construction site was full of activity. Heavy machines moved in every direction. Workers hurried from one task to another. The noise never stopped. My friend parked the truck and called the customer. A few minutes later, a man wearing a safety helmet walked over. They shook hands and quickly discussed where to unload the cargo. Watching them talk, I had the feeling they had worked together before. In this business, reputation seems to be just as valuable as driving skills. The hydraulic breaker was simply too heavy to unload by hand. Once again, the crane would do the hard work. Everyone immediately knew their role. One person checked the chains, another operated the crane. Someone else watched every movement and gave signals. As for me, I quietly stood back and watched. It was fascinating. Nobody rushed, nobody took shortcuts. Every movement was slow, careful, and deliberate. That's when I truly understood something. When you're handling equipment that weighs over a ton, there's absolutely no room for carelessness. The steel breaker slowly rose into the air. For a moment, everyone's eyes followed its movement. The noisy construction site suddenly felt strangely quiet. All I could hear was the crane's engine and the sound of the steel cable under tension, little by little. The massive breaker was lowered safely onto the ground. Only after it was completely stable did everyone relax. My friend looked at me and smiled. Done. Just one simple word, but I could hear a relief in his voice. Every successful delivery meant another responsibility completed safely. The customer carefully inspected the hydraulic breaker. Everything looked perfect. He signed the delivery form. Our first job of the day was officially complete. I asked my friend, "Do you always feel relieved after every delivery?" He smiled. Of course. As long as the cargo is still on my truck, it's still my responsibility. Only when the customer accepts it can I finally relax. That answer stayed with me. Before today, I thought this job was simply about driving from one place to another. Now I realize something much deeper. Customers aren't just paying for transportation. They're trusting someone else with things that matter to them. And earning that trust is probably the hardest part of this job. After saying goodbye to the customer, we climbed back into the truck. I looked at the time. It wasn't even noon yet. One delivery was finished, but the day was far from over. My friend started the engine and smiled. "Let's go. We've got another order waiting." That's when I realized, for a truck taxi driver, finishing one delivery never means the work is over. It's simply the beginning of the next journey. We had only been back on the road for a few minutes when my friend's phone rang again. He answered through his headset. Yes. Okay. We'll be there in about 20 minutes. After hanging up, he smiled at me. "We've got another job." I asked, "So, what are we moving this time?" He checked the order on his phone. Probably something easier. We're heading to a used furniture yard. They need help moving some furniture. I felt a little relieved. After dealing with a machine that weighed more than a ton, I thought this next job would be much easier. As it turned out, I was wrong. While we drove, I kept asking him questions. "Do you remember how many deliveries you've done over the years?" He laughed. "Not even close, probably thousands. A few jobs every day. Year after year, it adds up." I smiled and asked another question. "What's the most unusual thing you've ever delivered?" He thought for a moment before laughing. "One customer hired me just to move a tree, a very expensive bonsai. The distance wasn't far, but they kept telling me, 'Drive slowly, don't shake it, don't even tilt it.' I drove slower than I do with construction equipment." We both laughed. Every profession has stories that only the people inside it get to experience. About 20 minutes later, we arrived. The yard was packed with secondhand furniture and household appliances, wooden cabinets, dining tables, washing machines, refrigerators, metal shelves. Every corner was filled with things that had once belonged to someone else. Some still looked almost new, others clearly carried years of use. I asked, is this a second-hand store? My friend nodded. Exactly. So when people move or replace their furniture, they sell it here. The owner repairs whatever he can and then sells it to someone who needs it. I looked around quietly. It reminded me that every object has its own story. Something one family no longer needs could become something valuable for another. A friendly man in his 50s came out to welcome us. He shook hands with my friend like they had known each other for years. After chatting for a moment, he led us toward the furniture we needed to transport. At first, I thought there would only be a few pieces, but as we walked farther into the yard, the list kept getting longer. A large wooden cabinet, a dining table, several chairs, a washing machine, and plenty of smaller items. My friend turned to me with a smile. Ready? I laughed. I think so. But deep down, I had a feeling this job was going to be much tougher than I expected.
Anh chưa kịp dọn đấy. Cái bộ này chưa kịp dọn đấy. Anh đến đeo vào cái thuốc luôn rồi.
Ở đây nửa ngày, một ngày rồi. Không cần. Thôi khách mua về khách vệ sinh được. Về mua về chưa diễn xong chưa lắp.
The truck was packed from front to back. My friend smiled and said, used furniture isn't as heavy as construction equipment, but it requires even more care. I asked why. He replied, steel can survive a few scratches, but furniture, glass, and home appliances, one hard bump can ruin everything. The midday traffic in Hanoi grew busier. Even so, he never rushed. When I asked if he worried about being late, he simply smiled. I'd rather arrive late than damage someone's belongings. And that simple answer told me everything about the kind of driver he was. About 30 minutes later, we arrived at a small house hidden inside a narrow alley. A young family was already waiting outside. They had just moved into their new home and had bought second-hand furniture to save money. Watching their children run around with excitement made me smile. Sometimes happiness isn't about owning expensive things. Sometimes it's simply about having a place to call home. Unloading the furniture was even harder than loading it. The alley was narrow, and every doorway required patience. My friend calmly guided me through every step. Lift your side, take one step back. Slowly. After several minutes, the heavy cabinet was finally in place. The homeowner smiled. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Those few words made all the hard work worthwhile. As we carried in the dining table, chairs, and washing machine, one of the little boys looked at the table and asked his mother, "So we're eating dinner here tonight?" She smiled. Yes. That moment stayed with me. To someone else, it was just an old table. To this family, it was the beginning of countless future memories. Sometimes the value of an object has nothing to do with its price. It comes from the life built around it. When everything was finished, the family thanked us once again. As we drove away, I looked back through the window. The children were already playing around their newly furnished home. That's when I realized something. Sometimes a truck driver isn't just delivering furniture. Sometimes they're helping deliver a brand new beginning. It was almost 1 in the afternoon when we finally stopped at a small roadside restaurant. As my friend looked at me and asked, "Hungry?" I laughed. Very. The restaurant was simple. Plastic tables, hot home-style food. Most of the customers were construction workers and drivers just like us. After a long morning of physical work, even the simplest meal tasted amazing. Over lunch, I asked him if this job paid well. He smiled. "If you're willing to work hard, you can support your family. Some months are good and some are slow. We're not getting rich, but we make it through." Then I told him about my own situation. When I had just arrived in Hanoi, I still didn't have a stable job, and I was searching for a new beginning. He listened quietly before saying, "Don't rush. Everyone struggles at the beginning. The important thing is to keep going. If you're willing to work, your opportunity will come." They weren't complicated words, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. After lunch, we climbed back into the truck. The afternoon sun was still blazing. The workday wasn't over yet. As the engine started again, I looked out through the windshield. I still didn't know where the next delivery would take me, but I already knew one thing for certain. My first day in Hanoi had already taught me lessons I would never forget.
chuyện đến về Mỹ Đình.